Hello. Wow, such a wondrous glowing lighting. Welcome to Vision Denial. My name is Sam, and this is World Watch and the highlight videos, mashup videos. Over the last 6 weeks, I had made weekly videos where I discuss my thoughts watching every single playoff game, yes, including that one, of all 11 participating regions. Those have come and gone, and I'm still working on some other videos at this moment, highlighting each and every team to give a quick introduction. But in the meantime, as I'm still working on that, I thought, not quick, but simpler, I will just put in large videos of the highlights, and I'll be putting a multitude of them, one for all of the playoffs in order of how they appeared, and one for each region in order of how they appeared. If you look at the title, that's the video you're watching. So, without further ado, let's just get to the first one. Starting with, we head off to Southeast Asia with the inaugural the inaugural summer split playoff of the PCS with Beyond Gaming, Megabank Beyond Gaming versus J-Team. And just like every first round PCS playoff ever, it confuses delights and surprises. Now, J-Team looked confident in, one game during Game 3 and won it off of that confidence alone. The cohesion was necessary, especially against a team like Beyond Gaming, who are so well coordinated around neutrals and fights associated with them. J-Team will have a chance to recover in the lower bracket, but outside of their vision game, they don't look like a team to really expect anything from, at least from this series. Beyond Gaming, on the other hand, was a handful of surprises. It was just wonderful to watch. Now, while I think their early game approach is a little inconsistent, their neutral setup, vision from it, the way they approach the flanks and the team fights from it, as well as their use of the side lanes, is a lot better than many of the other teams that I've seen so far at this given point. Is incredibly solid. Now, if Beyond Gaming went the distance this playoffs, I would not be surprised. That said, their priority and targeting leave me wondering what would happen, or at least what it would look like against a team who has a similar, if not better, level of coordination. Would they be able to, pull off the kinds of plays they had in the series? Beyond Gaming could go the distance, but they have yet to convince me they are a world's caliber team. Winning decisively against the shy team is not the same as going head-to-head against a competitive team who calls out your questionable decisions. Shout out to Likai and Minji, who honestly pressured the side lanes efficiently and used the team fights in a way that left J-Team scrambling for their next move at every given turn. Take a look at the next series. Off into the PCS, and for the first time in a long time, the PCS's first round best of fives have not been disappointing. Very happy about that. The region really needed the boost for a minute. All right, we've got over here the CTBC Flying Oysters versus Frank Esports. And Frank Esports here show a lot of solid fundamentals. Proper vision play, where and when to attack neutrals, how to attack certain win condition and advance their own. The one thing holding them back this series is the lack of coordination during team fights, especially as they start to hesitate at the game going on. It was clear that any moment falling behind in gold created some unease in the play. The Flying Oysters, who were, by default, better coordinated team, looked so excellent in comparison to Frank Esports, were even slightly behind and nervous they could not approach them. But they show signs of hope for when they go into the lower bracket, so I don't expect them to necessarily just falter when they get there. Likely, possibly to move forward. The Flying Oysters, on their part, concern me a little bit by the brazen approach to their neutral objectives and inconsistent use of vision or lack thereof. Like mentioned before, the team fighting is excellent and their coordination, and they have solid use of side lane pressure that is being managed excellently. They weave their drafts in a way that allow them to flexibly pull in Frank Esports and use their aggression as a point of impact. It's very rare to see a team proactively bait their opponent into fighting instead of just waiting. It's a very clever way to circumvent some of the draft weaknesses that they pulled in. Let's see how it holds up against their rivals in the Talons going into the next round. Shout out specifically to Gemini and Rest, who established a lot of the early groundworks that allowed them to win these fights later into the games. Let's take a look at the next one. We head off to Southeast Asia with the PCS, where we've got J Team versus Meta Falcon Team. Meta Falcon Team's name. What are you guys doing? Very clean, very one-sided. Okay, not very clean, but very one-sided affair. Like the casters put it, where was this team at game 1, let alone the last series? J Team are more decisive, have fun and cohesive drafts, clear game plan, and solid understanding on how to maximize your own win conditions versus minimizing your opponents. Now, Meta Falcon Team, for their part, had overall stronger vision and neutral setup, but never enough to handle some of the fights that were coming their way, or even how to use the pace to their advantage to close out games when they did have a lead of some sort. Watching the series gets me to think that J Team, given their regular season history, is for sure 100% unable to pull these kinds of games against higher seeded teams due to either a lack of ability to do neutral setups, to have vision control that is consistent, or even consistent side lane pressure, so on, so forth. There are so many individual parts of it where the core fundamentals are there, but not consistently there. And they're a lot better than some of their lower seeded counterparts, but the series showed why they're the seeded third place, but also why they aren't likely to clinch one of the 2 PCS slots for Worlds unless they fix the underlying issues causing them to be unable to play against the higher seeded teams. Now, shout out to Kongwei and Uniboy, who really initiated these fights excellently and kept up the tempos in ways that forced Meta Falcon Team to just be unable to answer or even respond in any significant way. Let's take a look at the next series. Onward to the PCS in Southeast Asia, where we got Frank Esports versus Impunity. This was pretty crazy. It was pretty one-sided, kind of. All kudos to Impunity, who managed to present cracks in the facade that is Frank Esports. Where Frank Esports looked more coordinated, had the stronger plays, the easier track towards neutrals, a stronger team fight approach, Impunity just comes around in Game 3 and shows us all that Frank Esports actually have very limited draft options. With the limited draft options they could play around, just flanking options for side lanes and all eyes on M&M to carry fights. The second you limit the space for them to approach, then Frank Esports kind of fall apart and become super uncoordinated, which was really bizarre given the way that games 1 and 2 performed. And if a team like Impunity can figure that out and adapt in that way, then by all means, every team in the upper bracket currently is just bound to see it and say, perfect, we can pull that off significantly better. That said, all right, Frank Esports are still a team with excellent team fight coordination, and when push comes to shove, some solid macro choices. But the desperation was really there on both sides, as Impunity looked to send us to silver scrapes, but were stopped by a very poorly decided elder fight, while our friend YSKM and Frank Esports was split pushing to win the game. Shout out to Eminem and Pretender, who stayed alive for so long in these fights and maximized damage in really gnarly ways. They're really fun to watch, if anything, for this series. Take a look at the next one. On to the PCS, where we're in the upper bracket. We've got Megabank Beyond Gaming versus DeepCross Gaming. And the score says one thing. The results are a totally different thing. And by that I mean mostly that neither of these teams to me, like... Now, Beyond Gaming are looking like the strongest team fighting team and neutral team of the PCS. And just mostly that they need work on everything else. DeepCross Gaming had the stronger vision approach, better neutral setup, better side lane management, better draft adaptation, stronger laners, better early game overall. And if you're starting to sound like this is a lot of things all of a sudden, how does Beyond Gaming get 3-0 then? Well, the second we hit the team fight, all bets are off. Beyond Gaming will be 5k down and win as if they're 6k up. And part of that in this series is due to the lack of coordination and questionable target selection out of DeepCross Gaming. And to top it off, the positioning from the likes of Hana or Croscata downright throws many of these fights. Beyond Gaming do make the best out of every resource on hand, though, making sure to have some excellent positioning and flank angles. My concern is that if they face a team who are just as good, if not better, in terms of team fighting, how do they fare given how poor their laning phase went? These two teams are in the top 4 of the upper bracket, but I have no faith at this moment that either team would make solid representatives for the PCS. And that's rather concerning. Now, a shout out to Wako and Minji, who should honestly be studied if anybody wants to figure out how to approach positioning in a team fight. Like, holy smokes, they're really good. We head off to the round 2 PCS in Southeast Asia, where we got CTBC Flying Oysters versus Paris Saint-Germain Talons. And history just repeats itself, it seems. It's just back to spring. Now, if you looked at the last game, you would have thought that this was a 3-0 stomp. In fact, this isn't the first time that the Flying Oysters hand the Talons their keisters in the round 2 of a playoff this year. To note, both sides play vision and neutral objectives rather excellently and have top laners who live by side lane control. So much of these two teams have are pretty equally matched regarding that sense. The Talons holding a lot more consistency in their play, but it is so slow, leaving a lot of open chances for the Flying Oysters to come back into the game. Like the casters mentioned, they aim for 90-10 plays, which means that they are by default less proactive. Now, that isn't to say that they don't make moves that enable their victories when necessary. It's more to say that the Flying Oysters are more likely to throw caution to the wind and make plays that are more 50-50 and come out on top because they pull the trigger more often. Now, both sides have solo laners who make some questionable positional decisions, so neither team really have the edge on that front when it came to team fighting. So looking at the coordination, it was easier to see the highs and lows of the Flying Oysters over the Talons because of how safe they played. The Flying Oysters played to win, while the Talons just played to not lose. Now, against a weaker seeded team, that may work, but in the case where in this particular case, the proactive team always gets the edge in this situation. Not the guarantee, but the edge. Now, shout out to Gemini and Koala, who do so much work to set up the rest of the team for success. Let's take a look at the next series. Off to Southeast Asia with the PCS, where we've got DeepCross Gaming versus Frank Esports. This was utterly one-sided. Now, sometimes it's really easy to punch down on someone who barely responds back. Frank Esports came in today with mostly defensive vision and a dream for the perfect early game scenario that they put zero effort into receiving. DeepCross Gaming were the more proactive of the two teams, drafted for team fights and executed them better, stronger neutral controls, better flanks, just overall the better team on all categories you can think of. So seeing this, and noticing that they still fumbled on aspects of early game contests, or that their vision was rather sparse and mostly focused on vision denial around neutrals, moments of indecision that gave Frank some opportunities to come back, and overall bizarre macro choices that are rather easy to hide when you're regularly 8 to 10k ahead, if not more, in all three of the games. This was a pretty convincing series from a team that performed against the sixth seed asleep at the wheel. All right, Frank is the fifth seed at the wheel. Just like this should have been, of course, an easy go, but it's even easier if Frank Esports don't even show up. And given the kind of caliber the other teams, especially the teams in the upper bracket right now, are showing, it isn't enough to convince me that they could make a run in the lower bracket and hit a world slot. Shout out to Hana and Nesty, who initiated and controlled every team fight excellently, especially Nesty. You are breaking ankles. Let's take a look at the next series. And we're off to Southeast Asia's PCS. In the lower bracket quarterfinals, we got Saint-Germain Talons versus J-Team, and dear Lord, these two teams usually deliver something, and today they delivered, honestly, I wouldn't expect either of these teams to make it to Worlds. To me, they're just out of the running completely, right? Because if this is what you get, it's rather unfortunate, because we get glimpses from both teams of what it looks like when they're proactive and take risks. The Talons don't know their limits, and J-Team are solid, but don't know how to establish pressure outside of when they've made the proactive move. Outside of that, the Talons show a stronger aptitude around neutral objectives and side lane control, but neither team show good vision play compared to the standards of the international teams who have qualified, or even of the teams in their own region. There's an unfortunate nature to watching two teams figure out what angles of approach for their fights and then never actually executing on it. The Talons, when not being proactive, at least make the time to set up the play and establish control around the map and apply pressure. J-Team, not being proactive, just watches the map burns around them. And that's what made the difference in this game. Didn't matter that J-Team finally woke up at the tail end of Game 3. The damage had been done around the map, and for the Talons' win conditions, just it making the whole thing, no matter how large or any advantage that you would get, an uphill battle, as the Talons only needed one fight to secure the whole thing. Shout out to Burry and Gory, who during the early games established so much of the setup that got the Talons ahead. Let's take a look at the next series. It's the Southeast Asians PCS's winners finals with CTBC Flying Oysters versus Megabank Beyond Gaming in the Battle of the Banks. And congratulations to the Flying Oysters on being the 13th team to qualify for Worlds. This was a bizarre series, to say the least. Beyond Gaming, for their part, are consistent in their team fighting, vision play, and drafts, but when it comes to macro movements and side lane advantages, or even team fighting, they lose out to the Flying Oysters. And not from a lack of trying either. For a moment, it would look like a back and forth series, especially within the first 2 games, but Game 3 rolls around. And it shows that once Beyond Gaming fall behind, they find it harder and harder to come back, regardless of how proactive they are. The Flying Oysters, on the other hand, are also bizarre. A little inconsistent with vision, but excellent around neutral objectives and side lane play, which really necessitates solid vision work. And best of all, however, their coordination around team fighting is solid, but not necessarily around map movement and trying to make any particular plays. They also know exactly how to play while ahead, properly ballooning leads and applying pressures in ways that make it incredibly hard to approach them, harder than usual even. The decision making when behind, however, is another story. To extra emphasize their lack of coordination on macro movement, while behind it becomes a compounding issue. Sometimes I did notice the Flying Oysters, when trying to close, are excellent, but slow. Almost as if a little reserved and hesitant to close it out until certain, which is not to be confused with some teams who don't know how to close altogether. Beyond Gaming have another chance to qualify for Worlds, but I'm not super confident they'll make it. Uncertain. Shout out to Mission and Rest, who have been excellent at setting up the team for success during these team fights. Let's take a look at the next series. It's the losers it's like the losers quarterfinals. It's like the before the semifinals, the quarterfinals. It's the quarterfinals of the Southeast Asians PCS with Paris Saint-Germain Talons versus DeepCross Gaming. It was an interesting matchup, I gotta say the least. Honestly, if you give the Talons 30 minutes and a dream, they'll win anything. Which is a shame, because if they are too far behind, they don't do anything. Good thing they were up against DeepCross, because they can just wait and they'll stop doing anything at 30 minutes. These two teams are foils of each other, where the Talons have great vision control but shoddy vision denial. DeepCross have great vision denial but shoddy vision control, where DeepCross play very lane-centric, the Talons play very macro-oriented. And the issue here is, I think that neither team would do well at Worlds. Just, if either of these teams qualified for Worlds, I wouldn't think of it, of them doing anything. And at this point, it's a shame, because the biggest change is, how would DeepCross get better at closing out games, and how would the Talons get better at being proactive during the early game? If somehow the Talons make the adjustment for their series against Beyond Gaming, then we might have a solid team going into Worlds. But as far as I can see right now, we have teams who have coordination in just one stage of the game, and at any other, they are either disjointed at best or far too behind the pace at worst. I have a feeling that the Talons will take the second slot at Worlds, but that's mostly looking at the matchup with Beyond Gaming, who likely won't be able to keep up with the late game pressure that the Talons show, which, to be fair, the Talons show an excellent late game approach. I just wish that it matched the rest of the game. Shout out to Unified and Gory, who were hallmarks of the success they managed late game. Let's take a look at the next series. It's Southeast Asia's PCS's semifinals. We've got Megabank Beyond Gaming versus Paris Saint-Germain Talons in a very close, stylistically similar situations. Congratulations to Beyond Gaming on being the 18th team to qualify for Worlds. They almost threw it, allowing themselves in a situation in which the Talons were poised to reverse sweep them. Instead, they remained firm in their approach towards vision, side lane control, and neutral skirmishes, all fairly excellent. The thing, however, is that both teams here hold similar approaches to the game, and regardless of who won between the two, I don't think the final results or the finals results will change. I don't think either team would do better against the Flying Oysters. The only difference here is that the Talons seem less coordinated and require a lot more time to ramp up at a series, which is not great. Both teams also have fairly lack proactivity around the mid to late game. Early game, their proactivity is fine. There's a lot of approaches that they work with here that are fairly excellent, but once that's finished, they shake hands and opt to let the other side scale, which is kind of ridiculous given the kinds of drafts that they would give each other, which is purposefully scaling. The leads accrued early game, guys, need to go somewhere, but instead, either team would be instead of either team doing something about it, it was just a matter of time where one team made a mistake first and then capitalize on it. Beyond Gaming being the exception sometimes, which made a lot of difference in this matchup. Hopefully, the strange pacing that this team provides can be fixed before they head to Worlds, or they won't be having a great time. Shout out to Husha and Likai, who purposely created a whole lot of space during some of these team fights in a way that didn't let the Talons breathe or approach them. Let's take a look at the next series. We've got ourselves the Southeast Asian PCS Grand Finals and a rematch with the big bank battle. We got CTBC Flying Oysters versus Megabank Beyond Gaming. And this is even more one-sided than the times these teams met previously. I think this is a necessary statement for the Flying Oysters to show that come hell or high water, they are strong competitors for the group stage. At moments it seemed like the Flying Oysters would lose from being over-aggressive, but regardless of how many lost fights there were, or how many lost fights there were just in early game, and primarily only in the early game, the Flying Oysters would garner even more leads across the map. In the impressive feats of total control from the first ban to the disrespectful fountain dive at Game 3, the Flying Oysters tell the world that they have a solid foundation with laning, vision play, neutral objectives, side lane, and wave manipulation, and most of all, individual as well as team fight coordination. Beyond Gaming, for their part, seemed incredibly disjointed and lost. They have solid vision play and neutral approach, but in matters of team fighting, laning, or even proactivity, they were just a cut below the Flying Oysters. I don't have strong confidence from Beyond Gaming that they'll be incredibly competitive in play-ins, having a hard time to deal with other teams with similar styles as the Flying Oysters, but they do have strong knack on how to answer plays and punish over aggression. They keep proactive even while behind, and that is an angle I can appreciate heading into the world stage where proactivity from ahead or behind is necessary, even if they weren't as strong as the Flying Oysters in that proactivity. It seems like the PCS is sending in some strong representatives heading into Worlds, and it'll be a blast to see this new kind of style from the region. Shout out to Rest and Gemini, who caused so many issues for Beyond Gaming in their hopes to contest any early game advantages. Let's take a look at the next series. Damn, that was a journey! That's 94 playoffs, or depending on the region that you were watching, anywhere between 5 to 15 best of fives. If you want to watch from the other regions, or you really want to watch the supercut, on either side, I don't remember which side I'm going to put it on, you can just watch those there. I want to hear your thoughts also on like which one of these were your favorite, what teams you think you're going to be like rooting for, just anything and everything down below. I'll be again making some videos further down the line, or should have some videos produced further down the line with all of the magic that comes with it. So keep your eyes peeled. And with that, I'll see you all next time for when I do the introductions of all the different teams. Ciao. Thank you all for watching.